positively identified themselves and said that they were safe to come out. So it seems that the training, in that case at least, really did do the job, and those people were very safe. And as I say, slowly but surely, people are coming out here on the east side of the hospital. A very big parking lot here. This is clearly an employee parking lot, and there's some residential apartments and so on around here. So people, maybe young residents and so on, living in these apartments as well. So this is a hospital community, and hopefully they'll be able to go home, rest, gather their wits, and be able to come back here again and continue their job of saving lives here at Mercy Hospital. Reporting live, Ravi Baishwal, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you in the studio.
All right, Ravi, thank you so much. There's a programming note we have to mention here, and this is due to our breaking news coverage. By the way, we should say, too, we're still waiting for a news conference from Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson down at the University of Chicago, where a Chicago police officer is still being treated. But due to this breaking news, World News Tonight with David Muir can be found over on the air on Channel 7.2. If you're a Comcast customer, that's Channel 217. For RCN, it's Channel 618. WOW customers, you can find it on Channel 219. If you're a Charter customer, it's Channel 608. Mediacom channel, it's 723 if you're looking for World News Tonight.
All right, Chuck, we've been hearing lots of information from the scene, and we've been hearing something about the gunman perhaps taking his own life. Are you hearing anything about that at this hour with your late-breaking details?
Cheryl, that's how these usually end, but the Chicago police have not said how this one ended. It started, as we know, as an active shooter, and it lasted as an active shooter for about 15 minutes, with witnesses reporting multiple shots and multiple victims, including at least one woman on the outside and then several on the inside. The active shooter part of this ended fairly quickly with the death of the gunman. Then it became a search and rescue mission for Chicago police, and as they were moving through the hospital, of course, news crews arrived talking to witnesses, some of whom were employees, others patients, streaming out of the hospital as the police tried to take people to safety. One I-Team news crew there a few minutes ago talked to a man who witnessed what happened on the outside.
I was getting ready to get discharged from the hospital. We heard some gunshots in the parking lot. It was a body already laying on the ground, so I guess that was the first shots that we heard. He must have shot her or him if they going to work or coming back from work. I don't know which one it was. And he was shooting at the police. Then he reloaded his gun and turned around and shot again, because whoever it was must have been moaning or something, so I'm going to put you out your misery. That's how he probably was thinking. And he shot whoever it was twice again.
So the gunman dead of gunshot wounds. We're not certain whether they were from his own gun or from one of the responding Chicago police officers. And then there is a Chicago police officer who was at the time reported to be shot and wounded in critical condition, taken, as we've been reporting, to University of Chicago Hospital. The woman, the doctor who was reporting for duty, who was shot, precipitating this whole thing in the parking lot, she was also shot and wounded at the beginning of this. We really need to hear from Chicago police, not only to nail down the chronology of what happened, but also who was involved in this and exactly what their conditions are at this hour. Cheryl, Alan.
A news conference was supposed to take place at about 5:25. It seems to be pushed back. Maybe they're just trying to get all of the information. It's a very fluid situation that perhaps they're waiting for Superintendent Eddie Johnson to arrive. Mayor Rahm Emanuel perhaps could be on his way in an event when a Chicago police officer has been shot in the line of duty. This is pretty much protocol for elected officials and also the superintendent of Chicago Police to arrive at the area where the Chicago police officer is being treated, which is at the University of Chicago. We spoke with Sarah Schulte about 15 minutes ago, and she said she was about 200 feet from where the emergency room was, where several police officers had gathered tonight in support of their brethren, and she was still waiting. She had no idea, of course, what time it would start exactly, because a lot of the people who are involved in this, family and friends, have gathered a little bit a ways from where this news conference is scheduled to take place. But we can just do a recap for everybody. Just about 2 hours ago at Mercy Hospital at 25th and Michigan Avenue, a gunman, apparently, according to Chuck Gowdy, accosted his former fiance, who was a doctor who was arriving for her regular shift as an emergency room physician, And then apparently, according to Chuck Gowdy, she was shot in the parking lot by her former fiance. Then apparently that gunman moved inside of the hospital. We spoke with several witnesses who said they have been through shooter alert training. Protocol was taken. They were hiding, closing windows, closing shutters, huddling in bathrooms, huddling in the pharmacy. Apparently, he entered the hospital in the main lobby of the hospital, where some eyewitnesses said it appeared that he was shooting others at random. However, according to Chuck Gowdy, the first initial shooting took place in the parking lot, and it appeared it is someone he knew. But of course, we are waiting this news conference to take place. The ATF, of course, has been involved now to trace that gun that was used. And more police officers, of course, have begun arriving at the University of Chicago. We don't know an updated condition on that Chicago police officer. We know a woman was taken traumatic arrest to Northwestern Hospital. That's what we're told. The Chicago police officer remaining. Last update that we received is that he's in critical condition at the University of Chicago Hospital. Of course, the shooting took place at a hospital, so employees and patients and doctors are all evacuated, and ambulances had to come to the scene and transport to other area hospitals. 2 people dead at this hour and 2 people in critical condition, including a Chicago police officer, one at Northwestern, an injured victim, and the Chicago police officer at the University of Chicago Hospital, where we are waiting a news conference to get a chronological order of what happened and an update on just really what's going on.
And Cheryl, I want to show you here. These apparently are some still images. I believe these are from Mercy Hospital. Correct me, folks, in the control room if they are not. I believe you're seeing some still photographs here from inside Mercy Hospital. I don't know at what point in time these particular photographs were taken. There may be more than one here. There's just individuals there in what appears to be a lobby area in the hospital at that point in time. I'm not sure if we have other images or not, and I don't know at what point that particular image was taken as it relates to what's happened here today. Now other images where you can see the police officers. There you see the great number of squad cars and squadrons that are outside the hospital complex. These images now taken obviously from a little higher floor, perhaps a second floor there on the hospital as the police response was underway. Eric Hong, you've been talking to individuals who witnessed this firsthand, and I'm still thinking of those 2 women who were in that pharmacy right off the lobby. Certainly the active shooter training that we hear so much about, they put it into effect today, and probably without question saved lives, their own lives included.
Yeah, Alan, imagine an active shooter situation taking place. You hear the shots. You barricade yourself inside the pharmacy, these 2 ladies told us, and the gunman is trying to open the door and enter into your location. Just imagine that. That's what these 2 women who work in the pharmacy area told us just a few minutes ago. They heard more than a handful of shots. They knew what was happening, that this was an active shooter situation. Decided that about a handful of them hid in the pharmacy, and they just heard that doorknob moving, jiggling at least a couple of times, that gunman trying to enter. Just absolutely terrifying account we heard from those women. We've been hearing just harrowing accounts throughout this evening from people who are inside the hospital, also outside in the parking lot, just describing the chaos, describing just multiple encounters with gunfire, just multiple episodes. The gunman shooting outside the hospital, the gunman shooting inside that lobby area, the gunman shooting at staff, shooting at patients perhaps, also shooting at officers, as we know. And so just absolutely terrifying accounts coming out of Mercy Hospital, which at this point has been secured by Chicago police. We are told that they did a room-to-room search just to make sure that the danger had abated, and they have cleared Mercy Hospital. Still a very large police presence here outside the hospital at this hour, but officers and fire department personnel starting to leave in small numbers from this area. And the work of the hospital, we are told, continues at this hour. We've got patients who do rely on care. Some of them need 24-hour care, and so presumably some of those patients are starting to be brought back into the hospital after being brought out and put on warming buses in the initial moments after this shooting took place. Those 2 ladies we talked to that were in that pharmacy, Jennifer Eldridge, Monique Hubbard, said that they've got to come back to work tomorrow. I asked them, how do you do that? They said, we just have to do it. This is a hospital. We've got people that rely on us. And then so they will be back here at the hospital tomorrow to continue the work that they do here in helping people at this hospital. And so we've got a tragedy playing out here. We've got an investigation playing out here, but we've also got the very important work of the doctors and nurses and personnel of Mercy Hospital that also has to play out here in the midst of this tragedy. Just absolutely unbelievable. And certainly we're going to be hearing more of those accounts in the coming hours and days. Reporting live right now from Mercy Hospital. I'm going to send it back to you.
Yeah, and Eric, we talked to one witness who was exiting the hospital after she had just completed radiation and she heard bullets flying as she was trying to exit the hospital. So many horrifying reports and stories today, and some people did
Look at this little one being carried through the parking lot, and these are earlier pictures, of course, of individuals leaving the hospital complex. So I want to mention, we've been telling you, we've been awaiting a news conference which we're expecting at the University of Chicago. This would be from Superintendent Eddie Johnson, presumably, as we're waiting on the condition of the Chicago police officer who was wounded in the shooting this afternoon. We're expecting now that news conference is going to happen around 6 o'clock this evening, so we're about perhaps 12 to 13 minutes away from that at this point in time. I want to go to our Chuck Gowdy in the newsroom, Chuck, and to fill us in on what new information you may have at this point, Chuck.
Well, Alan, it's been more than an hour since we heard from Chicago police. The last time that there was any substantive information put out about this incident and the officer was from the police spokesman who said that an officer has been shot in the active shooter situation at Mercy Hospital. He is in critical condition but receiving excellent care. Please send your prayers. By the time we actually hear from them on television speaking about this in person, more than an hour and 15 or 20 minutes will have passed since any information came out whatsoever about the officer who was wounded or the shooter or the other two people who were wounded in this case. As we have been reporting, this began not just in essence but actually as a case of domestic violence, according to what we are being told. A doctor showing up for work is confronted by her ex-fiance in the parking lot of her workplace, and she ends up being shot by him and wounded. It could have happened at a drugstore or a grocery store parking lot. It in fact today happened at her workplace, which was a hospital, Mercy Hospital, and then he went inside the workplace and he continued firing there. But it began as a domestic violence issue, a problem that is grave in society and happens every day in numerous places, from people's homes and apartments to their workplaces or on the street. Today, it started in the parking lot of the hospital.
And yet at the same time, Chuck, and I'm reminded here, and I know we're going by witnesses' accounts at this point in time, the number of shots that they're referring to that were fired not only in that parking lot, but once this individual got into the hospital itself. We've lost count. We don't know the exact count, but it seems to be somebody who at least was equipped with either an extended magazine or at least was able to reload along the way.
One of those two things, or potentially had a second firearm. We just don't know. You know, there were those initial reports that he also had a long gun, but a lot of times these descriptions of guns and weapons and number of shots, they change once the bullets are actually counted.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that, and of course witnesses who experienced something, as one woman told us earlier, it seemed like it went on forever, even though she knows it wasn't. It was an eternity for her as all of this was playing out. I want to go to our Craig Wall. Craig has been standing by at Northwestern Memorial Hospital on the city's north side. We were told earlier, Craig, that an individual from this incident was taken there. Do we know anything more about her, I believe, her or him?
Yeah, it was a woman who was brought here, Alan, and right now we have been unable to get additional information from the fire department about her status. Northwestern Hospital is not giving out any information without having a name for anyone who was brought in here. What we do know is that the woman was in traumatic arrest and brought here in extremely critical condition. One of the people who was shot there, one of two women who was shot, the other was taken to the University of Chicago Hospital. The fire department still trying to run down some details, but they have not gotten any update from the hospital that would give us further information. So the last word is that the woman came here in extremely critical condition, and at this point, that is what we know about her.
I see, and presumably as we look at who was involved in this, the doctor who was shot in the parking lot would have wound up either at Northwestern Memorial or at the University of Chicago, if that seems to be the case.
So that seems to be the case.
Well, we are still awaiting that news conference that is scheduled maybe for 9 minutes from now. And Chuck did remark on the fact that Chicago police haven't really issued any information or statements since
are with all the individuals who are involved in this in some way, even those, for instance, who were in the hospital who have now experienced this emotional trauma of going through this, but in particular for the Chicago police officer who we know was wounded in all of this and was taken to the University of Chicago. I want to go back to Chuck Gowdy now, and Chuck, maybe you can give us some insight here as to where the investigation might be going and what officers might be doing at this point in time.
Well, now that they have managed to clear the hospital, it's only been an hour or so, Alan, since they accomplished that. The police officers on the scene first make sure that it's safe for the investigative teams to come through and gather evidence. They've got the weapon or weapons if there was more than one. The ATF will now run gun search on this, and they'll come up with fairly fast information on the history of the gun, where it came from, the ownership track, whether it was used in other crimes. There's a pretty robust federal task force in Chicago that works on nothing but tracking gun crimes, and they take weapons and they work on whether or not they had been used in any previous crimes. Of course, if it was a stolen gun, that would also come into play in this. So your investigative teams would be on the scene gathering evidence like that, essentially shutting down the area where the shootings occurred, which in this case would be multiple crime scenes, outside and inside, in addition to obtaining warrants to go back and look at the individual who was responsible for this now dead. They would go in and try to work his electronic fingerprint. They would grab his phones, his computers, his laptops, his PCs on his desk if he has one. They'll be looking at people that he was in contact with, whether he told someone that he was going to do this, whether somebody may have had advance warning that this kind of a thing was going to happen. They'll attempt to get their arms around what led to these moments of violence and terror this afternoon, because these things rarely happen in a vacuum. Rarely does somebody just get in the car and decide that this kind of an incident is going to play out. There is some element of planning, even if it's only a matter of a few hours.
And you've unfortunately been involved with covering a number of these incidents. In this one in particular, though, does it seem at all unusual that something that begins, as you put it earlier, as a domestic violence case with a former fiancé confronting a female doctor who was reporting to work in the parking lot there, and then it extending and becoming a larger incident in a hospital complex?
Well, you know, these things always, until you know the answer to what prompted them, they always seem unusual and unexplainable. It could be that this individual himself was an employee or former employee at Mercy Hospital. Perhaps that's where they met. Perhaps there was some other relationship that this doctor had with somebody at the hospital, and that he went in to try to make that right. You know, you never really know. Clearly, there was something that after he shot her, it prompted him to go into her workplace and continue shooting. As warped as it may be, there was something that prompted him to do that, and those are among the questions that the police will try to answer. And it's possible that he left some information about this, or that he had notes, or he had written letters, or other people in the hospital may have received some communication from this guy. Yeah,
the pieces of that forensic puzzle that the Chicago police detectives and others are unfortunately too familiar with in doing their jobs and figuring out why things wound up the way they did today.
Yeah, you know, look at what happened in Las Vegas. I mean, that man shot thousands of rounds and killed dozens of people, and to this day there's still no good motive for what he did, why he did it that day, and how it was executed there. So there aren't always clear answers. There are never good answers for any of these kinds of acts of violence, but sometimes you just don't know. I think it's too early in this case to say that. We haven't put a name even on the shooter, and but I think there's a good chance in this case, based on the way it started and the history of how these domestic incidents play out, that the police will be able to piece together some kind of a chronology of what led up to this.
Yeah, it would seem that, and I know you've mentioned that it did not take a long period of time to play out in real time, although those who experienced it have called it an eternity, but how something brought this to a halt is what I'm saying, from the beginnings in the parking lot to what happened happened there in the lobby of the hospital? We don't know how far the gunman got beyond that lobby. We know he was in the lobby because the pharmacy workers who were right off that lobby told us what they experienced there. But what happened after that point, we just, that's an empty space in terms of filling in what happened there inside the hospital.
Well, in some cases, these end when the shooter runs out of ammo or is confronted by somebody else with a gun, or figures that that there's nothing more, there's no more damage that can be done than what the person has already done. So there will be an answer to that question, and I presume that it will come when the police decide to lay out some of the details.
We're still waiting, of course, to hear when that officer came in contact with this gunman this afternoon in this whole incident as it played out too. And I want to mention too that I'm now joined by Judy Sue here on the set as well. Judy.
Chuck, thank you very much. And Alan, yes, I'm back here on the set, and I continue to follow the tweets from Chicago PD. And again, we're having this pause right now as we continue to await new information on the officer tonight. We are now 2.5 hours into this incident. Right around 3:30, slightly before that, is when we initially got word of this active shooter at Mercy Hospital. We are now approaching 6 o'clock as we continue our coverage now into our 6 p.m. news. We are still awaiting confirmation on all of the names and the numbers and the enormity of what happened here.
I want to go to Eric Hong. Eric is still outside Mercy Hospital there. And Eric, I don't know if that hospital is showing any semblance of people being able to work there this evening, and to what degree they might be able to.
Yeah, Alan and Judy, presumably the work of this hospital, and of course its very important life-saving work, continues at this hour. We're being kept about a block away from the hospital, though, so it's hard for us to see whether those patients who were put in the initial moments after the shooting on warming buses are now being brought back into the hospital. We presume that that is the case because I mentioned those are people who do need medical care. We've been hearing some of the more compelling witness accounts. They've been coming from some of those workers in the pharmacy that you mentioned, who were feet from the gunfire, that pharmacy just off the lobby where this gunfire occurred around 3 o'clock this afternoon. Those workers described lowering shades or lowering blinds to cover the windows of the pharmacy and locking the door of the pharmacy. But despite them locking the door and huddling behind in the pharmacy, the gunman apparently on a couple of occasions tried to breach that door, tried to enter. They could hear the doorknob jiggling. Just imagine those terrifying moments if you're on the other side of that door and you're hearing gunfire on the other side of that door. We've got one witness account from a third person, another person who worked in that pharmacy, who ended up leaving her post just for a few moments before the gunfire to get a can of soda, and she believes that may have saved her life. We want to let you listen to her harrowing account.
And one of the patients came to the window, and I said, well, I'll be with you in 1 minute. And I turned around, and then one of my coworkers walked up, but I walked off to get a Pepsi. And then when I came back, we heard pop, pop, pop. And then he was like, do you guys hear that shooting in the lobby? And so we listened again, and we heard shots. And then we just turned around, and we pulled the shutters. And then Jennifer and Monique, they just took the roll, and we just got on the floor and locked the doors and just hid out. And then we heard the police knocking on the doors. And we heard a lot of shots, like 8 or 6 shots. Then they were shooting at the window that's rolled down for the pharmacy, and they were pulling at the door. And we were in our supervisor's office on the floor. And then I heard the police say, police, anybody in there? I say, yes. He said, how many? I say, 5, F-I-V-E. And then they came in and got us out. But blood was everywhere, and it was just, I mean, had I not went to go get the Pepsi, I would have been right in the window when it all happened.
Those pharmacy workers describing that area as a relatively open area because it's an outpatient portion of the hospital, and so it's relatively easily accessible by members of the public here and there. Not a lot of barriers to entry in that particular part of the hospital. Those workers also describing that there is private security on a daily basis that is stationed in that lobby area. They could not tell us just how robust that private security presence is on a daily basis. But those workers say on a normal basis, there really is no Chicago police officer stationed in the lobby, just the private security. They also couldn't say whether or not private security was armed on a daily basis. But that gives you a sense of that lobby area, a relatively open area, relatively easily accessible by members of the public, according to those pharmacy workers, because it is an outpatient part of the hospital. And that is the location, that is the part of the hospital that this gunman chose to enter and begin his rampage. Reporting live at Mercy Hospital, Eric Hong, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
All right, thank you so much, Eric. And as you mentioned, that open area, that lobby, the pharmacy workers earlier talking about, I mean, they know that there were patients there, for instance, inside that lobby. They're greatly concerned for them and for their welfare tonight. We do not know if any of them were among the injured. The one woman who just told us her story of how just in that split second of going through a normal work day, you're catering the patients at a pharmacy window. I'm sure we're all familiar with that kind of a setup where you walk up to the countertop and they're behind a window and they're obviously dealing with your prescription order and this sort of thing. And she turns for just a moment to get a soda, and in that moment is when this gunman bursts through the door and starts shooting in the lobby. And Judy, as we've been talking, their active shooter training that they've all gone through, like it's amazing that they had the mindset to do it, and they did. They did exactly what they're supposed to do, which is to shut those pharmacy windows, lock the door, barricade themselves as best as they can inside, which they did. And then during that time period, they're not sure exactly how long it may have been, but in those minutes, whether it was 15, 20, who knows what, this individual apparently is on the outside of that door, the gunman, trying to get inside if he can, and he was prevented from doing so because they took those steps which they've been trained to do. All five of them huddled inside that pharmacy.
We do hear about these trainings all of the time, and it's still amazing to see it play out. Again, night has now fallen on Mercy Hospital. All of this started unfolding around 3:30 this afternoon. Chuck Gowdy has been with us all of this time, and he continues to get new information for us from the newsroom. Chuck.
Judy, to go back over what prompted this, it is, according to witnesses and investigative sources that the I-Team has talked to, the result of a domestic encounter that went violent in the parking lot at Mercy Hospital. An emergency room doctor showing up for work for her afternoon shift about 3:15 this afternoon is confronted and accosted by a man who we are told is her former fiance. He is armed with at least a pistol, and he opens fire, 3, possibly 4 shots, possibly taking steps away and returning to fire the last shot, and then leaves her laying there, goes into the hospital where the shooting continues. Additional people are shot and wounded, and he ends up shot and killed as well. Once you get beyond that initial sequence of events, some of the details become a little bit cloudy, and that's where Chicago police are going to have to fill things in. When witnesses are describing things from their vantage point, it sometimes takes on a different complexion, and that's where we hesitate to take what witnesses say as fact, and we would defer to Chicago police and investigators who will lay some of this stuff out hopefully sooner than later.
And Chuck, I know we have heard so many witness accounts now this afternoon. Do we have any other information to add about this encounter with the Chicago police vehicle and this officer in the parking lot? And we had heard reports earlier about this vehicle riddled with bullets.
No, other than that, there was a lot of gunfire, Judy, multiple rounds. I mean, if you add up not only the shots to the police car, but the shots to the victim outside and the shots that were heard and apparently fired inside, it would seem to be more than would come from one standard clip of one pistol, and would either indicate that there were multiple guns or that one gun was reloaded. It just sounds like an awful lot of gunfire, even if you take into account the possibility that there was police gunfire, and we don't know whether that occurred. The witnesses certainly don't seem to indicate that there was a police engagement in this and that it was over by the time the first armed officers arrived. But there were an awful lot of gunshots here that have to be explained.
Yeah, Chuck, I'm thinking of what you're just letting to sink in a little bit here, and you're right. I mean, in terms of the number, we talked about what this individual may have been using at the time in terms of a weapon, but it's certainly an individual who arrived at the scene there well prepared to utilize many rounds of ammunition, it appears, and whatever was going to go down.
It certainly seems that at least that he arrived with a loaded gun and possibly additional ammo, whether in an additional gun or in additional clips that he would then change out. It's hard to say. Nobody has reported that he was wearing body armor or some other things that we from time to time hear of that individuals employ in these kind of shooting situations. So it was the gunshots that attracted the attention of people in the parking lot who knew that something was drastically wrong. And then, of course, after the gunshots, he goes through the front of the hospital and the firing continues.
All right, thank you, Chuck, so much. We'll check back with you in just a second. I want to go, you're looking at a live picture here, and you see the microphone standing by itself, but this is a University of Chicago Medical Center. We're awaiting a news conference from the Chicago Police. Presumably, Superintendent Eddie Johnson will be addressing the media. We've now been waiting some time, actually, for them to give us some word on the condition of this officer. We're quite concerned for that officer's well-being, and as many people are around our city, and we'd like to get some word, that is for sure.
And we have to imagine that the police superintendent is probably conversing with the family right now, so we are still awaiting more information after that. Over at Mercy Hospital, we just got word from Ravi Bejwal, a reporter there on the scene. Departures of employees have now slowed to a trickle at Mercy. They have been evacuating those employees for the better part of the last, 2.5, 3 hours. And we also right now have some cell phone video, we believe, that came in from the scene of the shooting. Let's see if we can take a look at that.
Really be safe. Let's get back these buses.
All right, we were watching that cell phone video that was going by somebody who was taking video, obviously, from outside of the hospital. Even at a distance, you could hear what appears to be gunfire. It appeared to be coming in 2 bursts, I'll say. One of 3 shots that I was able to hear initially, and then perhaps as many as 5 shots. I can't tell you exactly how many. 3 initially, and then quite a number.
We're thinking right now about 11 shots, I think, is what some of the reports are at this point. Again, no confirmation. We're approaching 3 hours after this incident started.
I want to turn just briefly and go to the north side of the city, Northwestern Memorial Hospital. This is where another person who was wounded in the shooting incident was taken, a woman, and Craig Wall is standing by there. Do you have an update for us, Craig?
Right now, we're still waiting to hear an updated condition on the woman, whether she's alive or whether she is still being treated here in the emergency room. The last information we were able to get from the Chicago Fire Department is that she was in traumatic arrest, obviously critically wounded in some fashion in the shooting, and brought here in extremely critical condition. But Northwestern Hospital is not able to provide any kind of information. HIPAA regulations say unless you have a name, they cannot release information about who is here or what kind of condition anyone is in. They couldn't even confirm the fact that someone was brought here, but the fire department did indeed tell us that there was one of the 2 women who were wounded in this incident was brought here. We don't have an ambulance number yet, so we're not sure if some of the ambulances that we saw come in here were indeed involved with transporting people from Mercy Hospital, but we can confirm through the fire department that one of the 2 women who was shot in this incident was brought here, but no update beyond extremely critical when she was taken from Mercy Hospital to here. No update from the fire department in that regard.
Thank you, Craig. And we do not know, of course, who that woman is nor her relationship to what was going on with everything we've heard in terms of the scenario at Mercy Hospital. But let's go to Eric Hong now. Eric's been standing outside the hospital dealing with the employees and the people who've witnessed firsthand what happened there at the hospital this afternoon. And Eric, what's your update?
Yeah, Alan, as Ravi Bejwal reported just a few moments ago, the number of employees leaving the hospital has begun to slow to a trickle right now, but presumably there are personnel inside the hospital actually treating patients who need medical care, and obviously there are patients who need round-the-clock care at this particular facility. But we've been, again, just listening to some of the incredibly vivid witness accounts from people, patients, as well as staff members, people who work near that lobby area where the gunfire rang out mid-afternoon today, and just taken especially by the witness accounts of some workers inside the pharmacy area just off of that lobby. They describe this as an outpatient part of the facility, so relatively open part of Mercy Hospital where the public can kind of come and go unimpeded to some degree. But we've been listening to what some of those pharmacy workers have had to say. We're going to let you listen right now.
he was shooting just forever, and it probably was not that instance, but you're just hearing him shoot, and then you hear commotion. You hear him arguing with someone, right? And then they called the active shooter protocol, and you just sit there and wait. Eventually, SWAT team came and knocked on the door, right? And it was like a bang, but he was trying to get in the pharmacy at one point.
So I ran inside the building to alert the receptionist and the nurse. They are shooting outside. Next thing you know, we hear cold silver over the speaker. That means go and retreat and lock yourself in where you are, because obviously the suspect is in the building.
I was in the ER. We was told that something happened terrible outside, and our first goal was to start getting patients out of the rooms. And I grabbed who I could, took them to safety, and locked them in. And that's when I just heard, the noise from behind the doors and everything.
Yeah, we've been hearing from multiple people inside the facility talking about taking cover, not just those workers in the pharmacy who locked the door, and yet the gunman was still trying to enter and jiggling on the handle of that door at least a couple of times. What we've been hearing, as you heard from that last individual, that last man there in the emergency room, trying to help patients, shuttling patients to a safer part of the emergency room as those gunshots rang out, trying to help those people, not knowing exactly where this gunman might be. I talked to one man who was too shaken up to talk to us on camera, said that he was in a nurse's lounge with about a dozen other nurses. They shut the door. They started barricading that door, not knowing exactly, where this gunman was at the time, but also hearing just a flurry of gunfire. And those witnesses describing just multiple encounters with the gunfire outside the hospital, inside that lobby area. At one point, one witness described the gunman shooting at a police vehicle with officers inside that police vehicle. That vehicle then backing up, those officers backing up out of the scene to try to get out of the harm's way, but that vehicle being riddled with bullets, and those officers presumably, the target of this gunman in that moment. And so just an incredibly harrowing situation that played out here mid-afternoon, and we're in the coming days and hours, obviously, we're going to be hearing more of these witness accounts here at Mercy Hospital. Still a very large police presence here, even though at this point they have gone room to room within the facility, we are told, and deemed the facility safe. And so patients presumably are being brought back in to receive the care that they need at this time. We're live at Mercy Hospital. I'm going to toss it back to you now.
Eric, I'm thinking of the description you just said that witness gave you of those police officers who arrived on the scene in a squad car. And we think so much of first responders and what we owe them, the gratitude, debt of gratitude we owe them. But here they are. You hear something over the radio. We've seen this time and time again. You hear something over the radio. You're responding as you do. It's your job that you do it, but you head out there and you go right into what is a very dangerous situation, putting your own life on the line.
And they had no idea what they were about to encounter. We're going to go back to some of the cell phone video that we have from the scene earlier so you can kind of take a listen to the magnitude of what happened.
Holy I don't know where we'd really be safe. Let's get back.
You can see that is daylight right there. Initial reports when this first happened came in right around 3:30 this afternoon. Initially, we didn't know if the shots were coming from inside or outside of the hospital. Finally, we got confirmation that it started in the parking lot area. And then, of course, as you have been hearing on our live coverage, it then moved inside the lobby area of the hospital.
I was noting, too, as you're watching that video, and this is a different picture now. This is outside of University of Chicago Medical Center, where we're waiting that news conference to begin. But back, I just want to refer back to what we just watched and heard, the gunfire outside the hospital there. I noticed at the very end there's already police cars on the scene with their lights on the auxiliary streets around that hospital when those gunshots are being fired. And even earlier when we first saw that, and I'm thinking now of all the witnesses who experienced this, you think, how many shots did I hear? As we've tried ourselves to, at least 10 shots can be heard on that cell phone video we've watched. it's harrowing.
It is so difficult to discern at that moment. Let's bring back in Chuck Gowdy, who has been covering all of this with us this afternoon. Chuck.
Judy, Eric used the term harrowing to describe this. It was certainly that, all of that, and it was also unusual even by today's active shooter standards and the training that these employees would have received as employees of a major metropolitan hospital. Unusual because of the fact that it started outside and moved inside. That is not typically what these people would be trained to deal with. Not only hospital security, but also the employees of the hospital. They hear the shots outside and they are trained, and the protocol is to do one thing, and then all of a sudden the threat is literally right outside their door. As you heard witnesses say that the guy was jiggling the door handle trying to get in. So from the very beginning, this was an incredibly unusual situation, all the way down to that police car being riddled with bullets. Chicago police cars, the regular patrol cars, those are not armored vehicles, and so just because those officers in that car happened to be behind metal and glass, they certainly were not protected against the kind of gunfire that they were facing. This was a frantic situation. We started monitoring the Chicago Police Zone radio almost as soon as this started, and it was a frenetic situation. You heard officers practically begging to have Michigan Avenue closed for a period of numerous blocks, because at that point they did not know whether they were dealing with one gunman or more, whether the gunman was inside or outside, whether there were hostages, or exactly what the situation was. And so as they're trying to position Chicago police assets, from regular patrol cars arriving at the scene answering what they're hearing on the radio to a quick deployment of the Chicago Police SWAT unit, it was a critical few minutes there. And the fact that it came to an end as quickly as it did, with a fairly limited casualty count, said something about the way that the police responded to this.
Certainly we're there on the scene quickly, Chuck. I know forensically we'll look back, we'll hear some of the recordings I'm sure that you're talking about at some point in time, but even just the time frame involved and how quickly they went there, even just as I mentioned in that cell phone video, to see that even while the shots are being fired, there are already police officers there on the scene, on the auxiliary roads, who are arriving there in response, presumably, to the calls that you were talking about, Chuck, over their police radios, and trying to shut things down and keep people safe, and also ascertain exactly what they were dealing with there, whether it's one person they're dealing with or more than one person, and where are they exactly, and how they can bring this to a halt as quickly as possible.
And there were a lot of conflicting reports coming in initially. Let's give you a sense of this location of Mercy Hospital, where we are talking about. For those of you who are just joining us for our regular 6 o'clock newscast, we are on continuing live coverage of this breaking situation that started at around 3:30 this afternoon. Shots fired at Mercy Hospital. So Mercy is right about on Michigan Avenue between 25th and 26th. It is just south of the Stevenson Expressway, if you can kind of picture that map. So those reports came in at 3:30 in the afternoon. Very quickly after that, CPD confirming that shots were fired indeed at Mercy, moving from outside to inside. I believe we have Sky Map 7. You
get a clearer view here, though, Judy. And if as you mentioned, you're driving inbound or outbound on the Stevenson Expressway, and you're seeing right around Michigan Avenue. Some of you may be more familiar with State Street, of course, at that moment in time, but it's the hospital that's right there on the south side of that of those Stevenson ramps that are, of course, have passed through the Chinatown area, and now overheading a little bit closer over to Lakeshore Drive. So that's the specific hospital complex that we're talking about here. And you can see, even in our live pictures, how many of those streets are still blocked off. You have numerous police cars and other vehicles that are standing by throughout that area. They did bring in CTA buses relatively early on, following this incident anyway, because they wanted to make sure that there was at least a place where those who were being evacuated from the hospital could go, to at least have a warm place to rest, first of all, and not only for that, but also to recover from what they've experienced, at least immediately, and perhaps even to be attended to by those those who were on the scene assisting them.
And we were watching this unfold live on TV here as they were being escorted out of the hospital. Of course, you can imagine they left in a hurry. They had no coats, no jackets, no hats, no gloves, and so they were coming out. They were cold. Many of them, though, stopping by and talking to us and sharing with us those harrowing details of what they heard and witnessed before they went inside the warming buses. Let's get back to the scene down at Mercy. Now, once again, to reiterate, the hospital, Mercy Hospital, has been deemed secure right now. Our team of reporters, though, remain on the scene. Eric Hahn is down there, and Eric, you really have been our point of contact with all of these eyewitnesses from Mercy. I imagine, I mean, they were so great in telling us the details of what they witnessed, but they must have been so emotional.
Yeah, Judy, I mean, truly extraordinary and heartbreaking what we've been hearing from people who are here at Mercy Hospital mid-afternoon here today. I want to give a little bit of context to that cell phone video that we've been playing over the last few minutes here, where you actually hear a flurry of gunfire, a couple of rounds of gunfire sort of off the parking lot here at Mercy Hospital. That came from an individual by the name of Dennis Burke, who stepped off of a bus here at 26th and Michigan, was told to sort of be careful because the witnesses had seen police arrive. They had their guns drawn. He pulled out his phone, started recording the scene here, and that's where what you see is and what you hear is the flurry of gunfire. So presumably that may have been the gunfire that was directed at that police vehicle that we've been hearing our witnesses report this afternoon. Just one shot after another directed at officers in a police vehicle. That vehicle then backing up to try to get out of harm's way. But we've been seeing those images of that police vehicle just riddled with bullets. And if we tie those two elements together, the cell phone video and the video of the police vehicle riddled with bullets, that seems to sort of corroborate each other, at least according to Dennis Burke, the witness who shot that video, who stepped off a CTA bus here at 26th and Michigan. But we've been hearing from other people who are here just off the parking lot, just inside the lobby, describing just the multiple rounds of gunfire. One witness describing the weapon that was used by that gunman as a handgun. He thought it was a 9mm handgun. After initial reports suggested that this may have been a long gun. In fact, this witness, James Gray, that we talked to, said that he thought it was a handgun and perhaps saw him reload at one point. But we've got some witness accounts that we want to play for you. I want you to listen in right now.
We heard about 20, 30 shots just coming from that direction. Saw a couple ambulances just scatter and people just running. So I was in my truck just trying to keep low so I wouldn't get hit with any shots in case there was a stray.
20 feet from where that shooting happened, we heard the gunshots from outside, and then we were told, like, run to the back, and lock the doors. And our clinic is basically right there where they were shooting at. And we heard, I heard several gunshots, like maybe 8 or 9. I heard first 3 pop, pop, pop. Then I heard the next 4 pop, 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 pop. And next I heard, get down, everybody close the doors.
The gentleman started shooting at the squad car. So they backed up. And then after that, I was telling security to call for police to get more police here. And he came into the hospital and just started shooting people randomly.
Live picture right now from Chopper 7 high above the scene to give you a sense of what we're seeing here right now. Much of the perimeter of the hospital still cordoned off by authorities as they conduct their investigation here at Mercy Hospital. We are still being kept away, the public being kept away a fair amount of distance away from the hospital here, but just a few moments ago we did take a peek around the corner, and some of the warming buses that had been set up here for patients who were evacuated in the initial moments after the shooting. Some of those warming buses that were being used to house some of those patients have since emptied. Those buses are now empty, and so presumably those people who do need care have been brought back into the hospital to receive that very necessary care. But authorities, as you might imagine, they're going to be here for some time conducting this investigation. It appears multiple areas of the hospital are a part of this investigation. Just outside the front entrance in the lobby is also where witnesses have reported gunfire. And again, we've been hearing from people who are just just off that lobby in a pharmacy area, just describing just incredibly harrowing moments, scary, terrifying moments as they try to huddle for cover, and the gunman trying to enter that pharmacy area, presumably to continue shooting people, but he was not able to breach that door. Speaking to people here as well who have been leaving, who've been reunited with loved ones here outside the hospital, as you imagine, those family members just relieved that their family members are okay. We spoke with one woman, a patient here at the hospital by the name of Tracy Lyons. She is a cancer survivor. She has been coming to Mercy Hospital to receive care for some time now, says that she has survived cancer, and now she has survived this. Reporting live at Mercy Hospital, Eric Hong, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Eric, thank you. Yes, Tracy Lyons, she survived two things, that's for sure, that attempted to take her life, and we're grateful that she's okay. Emotionally, of course, the damage goes on for a considerable period of time. Many people, Eric's mentioning Tracy's experience, many people do go to that particular hospital complex for outpatient treatment, and even the pharmacy that's right there off the lobby, of course, people are coming in for outpatient care and, of course, having their prescriptions fulfilled as well. And I'm thinking of the individuals, the witnesses that we just heard from a short time ago, and just how they're letting that sink in. Julio Medina talking about how he thought he heard 20 to 30 shots being fired as he was in that area, and calling for additional help. And the woman who mentioned that she works in that outpatient clinic, you know, as she's trying to do her work, and then suddenly hearing and recognizing that this is gunfire that I hear. The other gentleman, and I want to just quickly mention here, this is a live picture of the University of Chicago Medical Center where that news conference from Chicago Police is going to happen in a short period of time. We're still waiting for that. The other gentleman, though, who explained how as he arrived there on the scene and he could see what he firsthand saw what was going on there with the gunman and the police officers that arrived in that squad car, and how the gunman then turned his attention to that squad car and opened fire on those officers as they were arriving in the parking lot.
And those are also chilling new details in terms of the timing that we're hearing from Eric Hong, that there were already police officers on the scene when that eyewitness off of the bus, CTA bus, started rolling.
Yes, when Dennis Burke got off his bus.
Started rolling his cell phone video. There were already police officers on the scene, and then we heard those gunshots.
Yeah, and quite a number of them, even at that point. It's just what they arrived and encountered there, and not to mention those who were actually on the scene working in the hospital. It's unbelievable. I want to go to Chuck Gowdy once again in our newsroom. Chuck, do you have some new information for us?
Alan, just looking at that scene at University of Chicago Hospital where the wounded officer was taken, when Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson comes out surrounded by other top officials of the Chicago Police Department, you can expect first and foremost to hear from them regarding that officer and the circumstances that led to his being shot and being taken to University of Chicago Hospital. He was feet away from an emergency room at one of the best hospitals in Chicago, couldn't be treated there because this was still underway. This incident was still dangerous and unfolding right in front of him. Had to be taken by a Chicago Fire Department ambulance to another hospital, University of Chicago. So the superintendent first is going to talk about that officer, and then as he is able, will lay out some of the details as to what happened today shortly after 3:15 p.m., what this individual did in the parking lot, how he moved forward to the inside of the hospital, and how they all ended up at this position 6:30 on a Monday night in November to talk about all of these things.
And Chuck, I don't know that if we can read anything into this, but it has been more than 2 hours since we had an update from Chicago PD on the condition of this police officer who was shot and taken to UFC.
Well, nor would we want to read into that alone, Judy. It certainly isn't good. The whole circumstance surrounding what happened today is not good. You have a police officer shot, wounded, taken to the hospital. You have other people shot and wounded. You have people dead, and you have a medical community in horrors here today, having to do what they were trained to do, but hoped they would never do and never thought they would be faced with.
No, and each one of those groups that you mentioned, Chuck, have been trained, aside from those who simply were just arriving on a CTA bus or had witnessed all this. But those other individuals, whether they're medical personnel, whether they're police officers, whether they're fire department paramedics responding to this, they've received the training specifically for situations like this. It's somewhere in different ways, obviously, for their specific roles. But it's at a moment in time here, and I know earlier Anthony Guglielmi from the police department had tweeted out that the officers are in critical condition but receiving excellent care. Please send your prayers. Yes. And certainly the prayers of the city are with that officer and his family, in addition to those who've been victimized by what happened there in a hospital complex this afternoon.
And you can imagine, prior to all of this happening tonight, just before 3:30, everybody's minds were probably on this being Thanksgiving week. The holidays just around the corner, thinking that they're going to work and getting ready to celebrate for Thanksgiving. And right before 3:30 this afternoon, everything changed for all of those who are now impacted and affected by what happened. And of course, all of us now watching what is happening, impacted as well.
I want to just turn briefly to Craig Wall, and I know Craig's been standing by. And Craig, forgive us for turning to you once more, but I know there was a woman who was taken to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and we still do not know the word on her.
Yeah, and I literally just got off the phone with the PR department here at Northwestern, again, pressing them for information. I had been given a possible name of the victim who was brought here, and so I have run that up the chain. I've given them the name. With HIPAA regulations, they can't give you any information, so I literally just got off the phone a minute or two ago, and they still do not have any information. It's a convoluted process, so if the person's brought here and you're making an inquiry about it and they've got to call down to the clinical staff and the clinical staff is tied up or the person's in surgery, sometimes it is just a time-consuming process for that information to get back up to the public relations department in order to get that information. What I do know is that if someone is brought here and they are just treated and released in the emergency room, then they would not show up in the hospital system. So it's possible that is complicating the situation, but it doesn't sound like it based on what we initially heard from the fire department, is that one of the women who was shot there at Mercy was brought here in extremely critical condition. So at this point, that's the last we knew of the woman who was brought here. The only person who was brought here to Northwestern was a woman. We don't know anything about her from the fire department, whether she was an employee or someone visiting somebody at the hospital or what. That information is not available. The ambulance number that brought the woman here, still have not heard back from the fire department on that, but extremely critical was the condition she was brought here to Northwestern, and we're pressing for information. Just cannot get further updates for you at this point.
All right, Craig, thanks. So we do understand the issues that you're dealing with there. Of course, there are the privacy, not just concerns, but privacy rules that hospitals operate under. And of course, they're dealing primarily with an individual's health and trying to make sure that their well-being is somehow secured before they're dealing with providing information, perhaps, too.
I want to just bring you up to date right now on the fact that we continue to await the first press briefing from Chicago Police Department. Initially, we had gotten word that might happen around 5:30, 5:45. It has since been pushed back. As you can see, it is now 6:33 tonight, and we are on standby. That should be happening at any moment now, and that will be the first time that we're hearing officially from Chicago Police on what happened this afternoon. Let's go back out to Eric Hong, who has been on the scene at Mercy Hospital for us. Eric.
Yeah, Judy and Alan, a couple of things happening here at this hour. Of course, the thorough investigation of those areas where the gunfire occurred here at Mercy Hospital. But you've also got, patients being treated here because it is a working medical facility, and those patients still need to receive that care. And so somehow doctors and nurses here at Mercy Hospital balancing the duties that they are charged with, essentially caring for patients, but also dealing with the fact that there's been just this horrible tragedy that's taken taken place here at this medical facility this afternoon. We have been hearing some just incredibly heartbreaking and extraordinary accounts, witness accounts from people who are working in a pharmacy just off of the lobby area where the gunfire occurred mid-afternoon. One of those pharmacy workers, a woman by the name of Lenice Donaldson, describing how her decision to go get a soda right before the gunfire occurred may have saved her life. Take a listen.
We were at work, and then one of the patients came to the window, and I said, well, I'll be with you in 1 minute. And I turned around, and then one of my coworkers walked up, but I walked off to get a Pepsi. And then when I came back, we heard pop, pop, pop. And then he was like, do you guys hear that shooting in the lobby? And so we listened again, and we heard shots. And then we just turned around, and we pulled the shutters. And then Jennifer and Monique, they just took the roll, and we just got on the floor and locked the doors and just hid out. And then we heard the police knocking on the doors. And first we heard a lot of shots, like 8 or 6 shots. Then they were shooting at the window that's rolled down for the pharmacy, and they were pulling at the door. And we were in our supervisor's office on the floor. And then I heard the police say, police, police, anybody in there? I said, yes. He said, how many? I said, 5, F-I-V-E. And then they came in and got us out. But blood was everywhere, and it was just, I mean, had I not went to go get the Pepsi, I would have been right in the window when it all happened.
So would he have come to the window? Or?
Actually, he shot at the window. We heard pop, pop, pops at the window toward the pharmacy in the lobby. He was shooting people in the lobby.
So he shot your window?
He shot at the pharmacy window. Yes, he did. It's shots at the window, and we were like, couldn't believe it. This was going on. And we just had an active shooter incident where we were drill. We just had a drill recently. We just recently did a drill.
Do you think it helped today?
It helped a whole lot. It helped a whole lot.
When you hear the popping, do you know immediately it's gunfire?
Well, no, you really don't know it's immediate gunfire, but we heard people in the lobby yelling, it's a guy shooting outside, and then they heard shots in the side, so.
And when you saw there was no body on the ground, you just saw blood?
Oh, I was just praying, thank you, Jesus, and we were just getting out. I was just behind the SWAT team that came and got us out, and we were just down and running with our hands up, leading out the hospital.
Yeah, Lenice Donaldson among 5 pharmacy workers huddled inside that pharmacy as gunfire erupted on the other side of that door. At one point, those workers telling us that the gunman tried to enter the pharmacy, was jiggling the handle of that door, tried that a couple of times, was not able to breach that door. But just imagine being those pharmacy workers as the gunman tries to enter your location. You're hiding. He's trying to enter, and at that point, you're making calculations in your head. These pharmacy workers told us as to whether or not they're going to have to fight this gunman off if he does make it through the door. But fortunately, he did not make it through that door, and those pharmacy workers at this point just counting their blessings. But those workers giving us a little bit of information on the layout of that area where the gunfire erupted, saying it's a very public area. Obviously, the lobby open to the public, but they're saying much of that portion of the hospital is an outpatient part of the hospital, of the facility, and so not a lot of impediments to entry. And so that gunman presumably had free reign in terms of going from one end of the lobby to the other into certain parts of the hospital. It's unclear at this point exactly how far into the hospital this gunman did reach. We're awaiting that information, trying to get some of those details from Chicago police. But investigators here trying to piece together exactly what took place here. But what is clear from the witness accounts we've been hearing, there was gunfire right outside the hospital. There was gunfire right in that lobby area where a couple of more people were shot. And then presumably this gunman may have come back outside, and there may have been some sort of encounter with officers where that gunman then opened fire on officers. And again, we've been showing some cell phone video from just off the lobby where we're hearing that flurry of gunfire. So obviously some of these accounts still coming out, and still awaiting official word and official statements from police. I'm going to send it back to you now.
Yeah, Eric, thank you. And that's the first time I'm hearing, and I know this is from witness accounts that you've been talking to there, of the gunman beginning outside, as Chuck has described, and the gunman apparently being the former fiancee of a female doctor who worked at the hospital, shooting her first, and then going inside. Eric is suggesting that some witnesses are telling us that then the gunman left the hospital interior and came back out into the parking lot once again, and perhaps was again involved in gunfire there. Listening to Lenice Donaldson, the woman who was there in the pharmacy, talking about just that happenstance of going to get a soda. She was standing at the window where in just moments that gunman would be firing at that window, but went to go get a soda, came back, back, and fortunately all of them there in that pharmacy had the peace of mind to somehow do exactly what they're supposed to do in that training. The drill that she says they had just a short time ago recently in the active shooter training to close the windows, lock the doors, and try to hide in place there. We know Lanice was there, we know Monique was there, who Eric talked to earlier, and also Jennifer too. And Chuck Gowdy standing by. Chuck, you've been with us all afternoon here, and I know you have some word on one of the Chicago police officers who somehow encountered this gunman along the way.
Well, we know about the one officer who was critically wounded when this was unfolding. We are also now being told that there was a second Chicago police officer who was hit by a gunshot but was not wounded. Take a look at this picture of his holster and the mar mark on the right-hand side of the holster. That is where a bullet struck the holster. The officer was not hit because you can see there in this Smith & Wesson pistol, the bullet is protruding from just right where the slide of that gun is, above the trigger. His gun saved him from getting shot by that bullet. This officer was not wounded. He's fine. One of his colleagues, however, not nearly as fortunate today, was critically wounded. He's the one who is at University of Chicago Hospital. We are awaiting word from Chicago police officials regarding that officer. But so there were two officers who were hit by gunfire, one much more fortunate than the other.
Exactly, and it goes back again to just the moments in time that things occur here, and I just can't get over that bullet.
That picture right there.
That bullet lodged in the side of the officer's pistol, and of course if it did not enter there, it presumably would have gone into him just inches away.
And that is the new information that we're getting in right now. Initially we weren't sure how many police officers actually encountered the suspect, so now we know at least two of them, and once again one of them in critical condition, last we heard, who was rushed over to University of Chicago hospitals. We continue to stand by over there waiting on Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson to come out and give us an update on the officer's condition and our first official media briefing on the details of what happened here tonight. That started at 3:30 this afternoon. We are now more than 3 hours into it. You're looking now, that is a picture over at University of Chicago hospitals. You can tell that there is a contingent of police officers now waiting at that outside area where all of the media has been told to gather as we continue to await this press conference.
And not unusual, of course, when an officer's been wounded. For many officers, maybe they know the particular officer, they might have that information, and they want to make, they're there for the well-being, there for support, there to just let their presence be known, and to let that officer's family know that they're supportive of all they're going through, and hopefully offering their prayers for a good, safe outcome here as well. And I'm also mindful, and I know, Chuck, you're still with us here, I'm thinking of all these individuals who are not police officers, and particularly the medical personnel and what they went through today. In past incidents like this that you've been associated with in your coverage, what is available to them? Because these people, I mean, they've been traumatized. They've been traumatized through their experience, and now they're the very same people that are supposed to show up the next day at work.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, they will have to show up. They're supposed to, and most of them will. Not to say that they're not going to be fragile and damaged from this. They may make it through tonight on adrenaline, but are going to need help tomorrow night and in 2 weeks, when the reality of this situation, not only of what they experienced, but what they lived through, it comes back and rests on them, and they return to reality. So they'll be taken care of. These things do happen, and people do get the kind of treatment that they need, but clearly this is out of the realm of normalcy for almost everybody who went through this today.
And when I ask that question, I certainly don't want to diminish the emotional toll it takes on police officers and first responders in general, because sometimes we might think, oh, well, that's what they're accustomed to. But whether you're trained for it or not, it still has that emotional toll, and it can be traumatizing. And I'm sure the Chicago Police Department has programs, hopefully, for assisting officers in that fashion as well.
Well, it's not just a factoid that most officers go through their careers without firing their weapon, without being involved in critical situations like this. They train for things that most of them never actually live through. And so for Chicago police officers, the daily threat is there, but for the officers who are directly involved in something like this, unless they're on a SWAT team or some kind of a hostage rescue team, they are not going to deal with these kinds of instances on a regular basis.
Okay, we're just getting reports from Sarah Schulte, who is also over there at the scene at UFC, that quite a few police cars with sirens just showed up on the scene at the University of Chicago hospitals. And Chuck, if you're still with us, I wonder if you can walk us back a little bit here, because we have been hearing so many eyewitness accounts coming through, and some information confirmed, some information not. But we do know at this point that this incident started out in the parking lot area when the suspect encountered a female doctor who was showing up for work, and presumably he was her former fiance.
That's what we have been told by multiple sources this afternoon. The woman, an ER doctor showing up for her regular shift, her former fiance, we're told, is also there in the parking lot and encounters her, accosts her. He has a gun and he opens fire on her. It's not clear exactly how many shots were fired, but certainly more than a few. And some witnesses have indicated that this individual actually may have walked away and then come back and fired additional shots, and it was only at that point, as this former fiance of his is on the ground, that he then takes his gun and goes inside the hospital.
Thank you, Chuck. And I know some of you may still be just joining us right now, too. There are 4 people were shot in this incident today. 2 of those individuals are dead. That includes the gunman who was involved in this, and 2 people are wounded, including the Chicago police officer, who are awaiting word from the Chicago Police Department regarding that news conference at the University of Chicago Medical Center regarding that police officer's condition. Some of you may also be joining us here wondering where's our normal programming on at this hour. It would be Wheel of Fortune, of course, and of course we're continuing to follow that breaking news here, but I do want to tell you that Wheel of Fortune will be airing early this morning at 1:35 a.m. on ABC 7, 1:35 a.m. for Wheel of Fortune, just for your information.
And if you are just joining us right now with our live continuing coverage on this breaking situation, I want to bring you up to date on what happened here. Around 3:30 this afternoon, those initial reports came in about shots fired at Mercy Hospital. Mercy is on Michigan, right around 25th and 26th. Pretty large campus that encompasses that area just south of the Stevenson Expressway. Pretty quickly after that, we were getting tweets from Chicago PD confirming that shots were fired, and now the entire hospital campus was on lockdown. They were under a partial evacuation, sending staff and employees out. We saw many of them streaming out for a better part of 2 hours with their hands above their heads, coming out and heading past the parking area into warming buses. And then following that, we got confirmation that the shooter indeed was killed in all of this. At this point, we still do not know if those were self-inflicted wounds or if the shooter was indeed killed by Chicago police officers who were on the scene. We know at this point at least 2 officers encountered the suspect, one of them right now in critical condition. That's the last word we had, but that was about 2 hours ago.
And we're still waiting, of course, on that word from the police department. And going back to the origins of this, I read about, 3:15 or so this afternoon, sometime between 3 and 3:30 in any event. It appears that what happened there in terms of the active shooter was a relatively short period of time, perhaps only 15 to 20 minutes, where that transpired before things were secured. We didn't know it at the time.
Right.
We know it in hindsight now.
Yes.
But until things were secured and they could then tell us that the active shooter situation's over at the hospital grounds themselves at this point are safe. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't being kept away, because police have a lot to do, and they still do tonight for that matter. But it was a relatively short period of time that things transpired, and now you have a much longer period of time where people are putting the pieces together as to what exactly happened there and why.
Yeah, I want to say for about 2 hours that entire campus was on lockdown. Those evacuations were happening. Police officers were conducting a methodical search floor by floor and room by room, even though probably at that moment they knew the shooter was down, but they wanted to make sure that there were no additional injured people inside of the hospital. No one still hiding behind locked doors, which we have since learned so many of them were hiding behind locked doors.
Some of them were texting friends and texting loved ones and letting them know what their situation was, but still themselves not knowing
what was happening,
until a police officer came and told them, you know, it's okay. And even then, you can imagine people who might even be somewhat hesitant. Do I believe that this is a police officer or not who's come to the door? Certainly the pharmacy workers who were there in that pharmacy, 5 of them, who were hiding from the gunman on the other side of the counter, were wondering that same thing. I had to be assured that it was indeed Chicago police.
Gives me chills still thinking about that. Okay, well, let's go back to Chuck Gowdy with some new information for us, Chuck.
Judy, the I-team is now able to identify the doctor who was the initial target in the parking lot of this apparent domestic incident. She is this woman, Dr. Tamara E. O'Neill, educated at the University of Illinois, Chicago, according to her bio, and apparently had an affiliation, at least for a time, with a medical group in Ann Arbor, Michigan, currently assigned to the emergency room at Mercy Hospital. And it was her ex-fiance that today accosted her heading into work, and she ended up shot and wounded in the parking lot of Mercy Hospital. Dr. Tamara E. O'Neill, we are not certain of her condition at this point. We do know she was shot multiple times, according to Chicago police, perhaps as many as 6 or 7 times before her ex-fiance then went into Mercy Hospital and started shooting at additional people.
And Chuck, I think you've mentioned this before, with regard to the ex-fiance, we do not know what his relationship would have been with the hospital, if anything, other than his former fiance was a doctor there.
Well, we don't know, and we can't find, at least initially in Cook County, a restraining order or legal action she had against him, or in Washtenaw County, Michigan, where she apparently have worked for a time in Ann Arbor for a medical group. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist somewhere else under a different name or isn't sealed, but in any event, we are working now to find out what their relationship was when it broke off and whether or not there is any legal paper on their history.
All right, Chuck, thank you for that. Dr. Tamara E. O'Neill, physician there at Mercy Hospital, the individual that apparently was the target initially of the gunman, her former fiance, that to our understanding and our information knowledge now, that she was the first person who would have been shot in the parking lot there at Mercy Hospital.
And as you can tell, if you're with us throughout the afternoon and tonight, bits and pieces of information now surfacing about the people who are involved in what happened here this afternoon. Right now, you're looking at a live picture. Again, this is at the University of Chicago hospitals. We are staged just outside of the hospital. That is where the critically injured Chicago police officer was rushed to this afternoon. We saw the pictures live as his ambulance was arriving at UFC. Right now, we are still awaiting our first media briefing tonight from Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson. It should be happening at any moment now, and we will let you know as soon as that does.
I want to go to our Eric Hong, and Eric has been there on the perimeter of Mercy Hospital for the better part of this day, Eric. And I know I have not heard anyone from the hospital talking. Perhaps they're leading or waiting for Chicago police to have their say on this first. Maybe you can give us a sense as what's been going on there tonight now, hours after the shooting occurred.
Yeah, Alan, no official statement from Mercy Hospital other than to say about an hour ago we heard that Chicago police, they said that Chicago police had finished their canvass of the area. They had been going through the hospital room by room just to make sure that the entire facility was secure. So that's really the only thing we've heard from Mercy Hospital officially as to what happened this afternoon. But we've been hearing from witnesses all afternoon and evening, just hearing terrifying accounts of people hiding behind locked doors as that gunfire erupted. I spoke with one man who was inside a nurse's lounge with about a dozen other nurses when the gunfire rang out. They shut the door, they barricaded the door and waited for help. I spoke to another man who was working inside the emergency room. His name is Clarence Smith. He said that after that gunfire erupted, they began sort of shuttling patients out of a sort of a public area into a less public area to try to keep those people safe, those caregivers giving care to those patients, trying to get them out of harm's way as those bullets were flying. And then we've been hearing, of course, from those pharmacy workers who were just feet from the gunfire, closing the blinds, locking the door to keep the gunman from entering that part of the facility. We've also been looking at some cell phone video that we've obtained from an individual by the name of Dennis Burke. He stepped off of a CTA train pretty much where I'm standing right now at 26th in Michigan. He lives not far from here. He heard shouting from onlookers who were saying, you know, to be careful because police had arrived en masse and some of those officers had their guns drawn. He decided he was going to pull out his cell phone camera to start to videotape the scene, and this is what he saw.
Holy oh. I mean, I don't know where we'd really be safe. Let's get back these buses.
That video taken by Dennis Burke, again, a nearby resident stepped off a CTA bus. He saw that scene. He heard those gunshots, what appeared to be a couple of rounds of gunfire, flurry of gunfire taking place here outside of Mercy Hospital. The sound just unmistakable as being gunshots. And he told me he stuck around for a little while. He saw at least one individual being worked on outside the hospital, chest compressions, that kind of care. Obviously, the person at that moment was not in very good shape, seemed perhaps critically injured at that moment. He witnessed that. He ended up going home, felt shaken, came back here. He's been speaking to reporters, just giving his account of what took place. But as I mentioned, all afternoon, all evening, I've been hearing from people, patients as well as staff members here. And many of those staff members, they're going to have to return here tomorrow. We spoke to a couple of pharmacy workers. They said they will be back here at work tomorrow because those patients depend on them. Despite what has happened at this medical facility, they will be back here doing the work that they've been charged to do. I'm going to toss it back to you now.
Eric, I've been communicating with several employees who have gone back inside the hospital. They are staying at work tonight because they are needed inside the hospital for so many people who need their services. Of course, this is where people go to heal, and the employees are back working tonight.
That's the essence of medical professionals, isn't it? Where they give of themselves for the good will of others.
And sacrifice.
Chuck Gowdy, I know, Chuck, you have additional information for us.
Alan, several sources are now telling the ABC7i team some more background on what led to this encounter in the parking lot that seemed to have precipitated this entire thing at Mercy Hospital. Dr. Tamara O'Neill, who was showing up for her emergency room shift, apparently was supposed to be married last month, October, with the gunman. She broke off the wedding in September. So today he showed up apparently with a gun and was in the parking lot, and their encounter ended up being the way that this was going to be addressed. Their wedding date was October 27th. And she broke off the wedding in September, and apparently that did not go over well, and he showed up today with a gun. He then, after shooting her multiple times, went into the hospital and began firing on additional people, and we know what the outcome was, with multiple people shot, 2 people dead, including the gunman, as we still await word from University of Chicago Medical Center, from Chicago Police, on the condition, the state of their officer who was shot and critically wounded in the early stages of this relatively brief event at Mercy Hospital, although a terrifying one at that. The video that we've heard, and mostly heard, you don't see the shots being fired, but you certainly do hear those gunshots being fired, described by witnesses as rapid fire and multiple, and the video, the sound on that video, certainly seems to back that up, leaving 2 dead, 2 in critical condition at last official report by authorities and the Chicago Police Department, as we head into the 7 o'clock hour and await word from Chicago Police about details of their officer's condition and exactly what led up to this. We're now heading close to 4 hours since this episode played out at Mercy Hospital, with Chicago Police SWAT units arriving on the scene, and we'll await to hear word as to whether or not it was actually a SWAT team member who brought an end to this, killing the gunman, where we haven't haven't been told whether he committed suicide to end it, as is the case with many of these active shooter situations, or whether it was indeed someone from a Chicago police SWAT sharpshooter team that took him out inside the hospital. But it did happen inside, and it began outside. And this Dr. Tamara O'Neill, we can now confirm, was supposed to be married to the gunman in late October, broke it off in September, and what happened in the parking lot today was the result of that.
Well, Chuck, we appreciate the background information there. I'm looking at the calendar. We're now 3 weeks past what would have been their planned wedding date on October 27th. 3 weeks just past that. And you're telling us that that she informed her former fiance that the wedding was off back in September, leading up at least to what we believe, leading up as a possible motive to what happened there outside the hospital this afternoon, and then continuing beyond that into the hospital itself, and some witness accounts indicating that not only inside the hospital, but then returning outside once again. And at some point along the way, encountering police officers who were responding to that call in their own squad car. And witnesses have described how that police car was shot upon and bullet holes are in it. So that occurred along the way. One police officer, one who was not wounded, I should add, demonstrated and showed us, we've seen the image there of how his holster and his own pistol stopped a bullet from wounding him. A bullet actually penetrated into his own pistol, and we have that image as well. Yeah, I want to just give you a programming note here. We're going to go to network coverage here on ABC 7 with Dancing with the Stars, but we'll continue our coverage right here on WCLAU and on our website and news app.
Is the finale of Dancing with the Stars.